Most people die with their secrets intact. There is a moment, doctors know it, chaplains know it, nurses who have sat beside enough beds know it, when something shifts in a person, when the weight of what they have done in the world becomes heavier than the weight of the body itself, when the instinct to protect the self finally loses out to something older, something harder to name. Call it conscience, call it cowardice, call it the simple arithmetic of a mind that knows it no longer has anything left to lose. For decades, sometimes for entire lifetimes, certain people have carried something, a name, a location, a single night they have never spoken aloud. They have built marriages over it, raised children inside it, attended church, paid taxes, smiled at neighbors, and all the while, somewhere beneath all of that, the truth was waiting. Somewhere, a family was waiting too, not knowing why, not knowing where, not knowing if the person they lost ever mattered enough for someone to speak. This is a series about the last 5 minutes of a secret, about what happens when a dying person looks at the dark and decides, for whatever reason, in whatever proportion of guilt and self-preservation, to finally say the words out loud. What follows are 5 true cases, 5 confessions made at the edge of death, 5 times the truth waited years, decades, in one case over 40 years to arrive. It always arrives.
Larry Webb. On August 8, 2000, a 10-year-old girl named Natasha Carter, called Alex by everyone who knew her, was last seen alive in Beckley, West Virginia. She was with her mother, Susan Carter. They were living at the home of Larry Webb, a man Susan had married or was believed to have married. The details of their relationship were, like many things in this story, unclear. What was clear was that Alex had a father, a man named Rick Lafferty, who was in the middle of a custody battle over his daughter. The last thing Susan had told him was that he would never see Alex again. He didn't. When Alex and Susan vanished, investigators suspected Larry Webb from the beginning. He was interviewed. He denied everything. He said he believed he had been away on a trip when the two disappeared. He said he had loved Susan. He said he had loved Alex with all his heart. He said he didn't know what had happened to them, that over the years he had even traveled to Cleveland looking for them. The case went cold. The FBI listed Susan and Alex as missing persons. For over 2 decades, Rick Lafferty had no body to bury, no grave to visit, no answer to the only question that mattered. 21 years passed. In 2021, the FBI reopened the case. In 2022 and 2023, investigators executed search warrants at Larry Webb's home on Kyle Lane in the Mabscott area of Raleigh County. What they found inside the house would crack the case open. In a bedroom that had once belonged to Alex Carter, embedded in the wall behind the baseboard, investigators recovered a single bullet. It was sent to the FBI lab. The DNA results confirmed the blood on that bullet belonged to a 10-year-old girl who had been missing for over 2 decades. In October 2023, Larry Webb, by then in his early 80s, in a nursing home suffering from dementia, was indicted for the first-degree murder of Natasha Carter. When a reporter asked him about it, he said, "I have dementia. I don't know what happened." He was lying. He had known for 23 years exactly what happened. By April 2024, Larry Webb was dying. He had been transferred from his nursing home to the hospice wing of Mount Olive Correctional Center. Investigators, Raleigh County Prosecuting Attorney Ben Hatfield and his agent Jeff Shoemate, went to see him. What they got from the dying man in the first week of April 2024 was what Hatfield would later call a detailed, undeniable, unconflicted confession. Webb told them he had got into an argument with Susan Carter over money. He believed she had spent cash that belonged to him. The argument turned violent. He shot her. And in the immediate aftermath of what he had done, with Susan Carter dead on the floor of his home, Larry Webb made a calculation. He looked at Alex, a 10-year-old girl who was also in the house, and he decided she was a witness. He shot her too. He told investigators he had wrapped both bodies in bed linens. He placed them on the basement floor while he went outside and dug. Over the course of two nights, Larry Webb excavated a shallow grave in the wooded area of his backyard. Then he buried a mother and her daughter in it. He cried himself to sleep that first night. Then he went back to his life. He gave investigators the location of the grave. On April 9, 2024, Webb was transported from the hospice to his former property on Kyle Lane. He was too ill to speak. He could not show them where to dig. Investigators searched for 3 days. On April 22, 2024, at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, the remains of Susan and Alex Carter were found in the backyard of the home where they had been buried for 24 years, 3 months, and 14 days. Larry Webb had died that morning. He was pronounced dead at 10:30 a.m. at Montgomery General Hospital. His victims were found 6 hours later. A bit of a poetic ending, Hatfield said at the press conference the following day, that not even I could write. Rick Lafferty, Alex's father, the man who had not seen his daughter since the custody battle of 2000, stood before reporters and said, "Kind of a sad day, but also a happy day, because I can bring my baby home." Alex Carter was 10 years old when she died in the house on Kyle Lane. She had been in the ground in the backyard of that house for 24 years, 3 months, and 14 days.
Paul Michael Stefani. God damn, will you find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody. That call came in to Minneapolis Police Dispatch in the early hours of June 3, 1981. The man on the other end was weeping. He gave them a location. He told them where to find the body. Then he hung up. The body was that of Kimberly Compton, 18 years old, from Pepin, Wisconsin. She had arrived in St. Paul that same day on a bus, looking for a job and a new beginning. She had been stabbed 61 times with an ice pick. She had been in the city for a matter of hours. The man who called, the man who wept, the man who begged police to find him would not be identified for another year, and the full truth of everything he had done would not be known for 16 more years after that. Paul Michael Stefani was born in 1944, the second of 10 children into a devoutly Catholic family in Austin, Minnesota. His mother remarried when he was 3. His stepfather was known to beat the children and on occasion throw them down the stairs. Stefani grew up, moved to the Twin Cities, found work as a janitor, got married, had a daughter. Then the marriage collapsed and so did the rest of it. By the late 1970s, he was adrift. What happened inside Stefani's mind in those years is not fully understood. What is known is that on New Year's Eve 1980, something broke open. Karen Potak was 20 years old. She had come to St. Paul to celebrate the New Year with her sisters, left the party around midnight, and wandered the city alone. What happened next was reconstructed only from physical evidence. Potak herself would have no memory of it. She had been beaten with a tire iron, more than 10 blows to the head. The beating was so severe that her skull fractured and her brain was left partially exposed. She was found naked in a snowbank near the Malmberg manufacturing plant where Stefani had once worked at 3 o'clock in the morning. She was found because Stefani called it in, weeping, barely coherent, directing police to her location. Potak survived. The brain damage was permanent. She could not identify her attacker. She never would. Kimberly Compton stepped off a bus in St. Paul on what was supposed to be the first day of her adult life. Stephanie was at a diner nearby. He offered to show her around the city. She accepted. She was dead within 15 minutes. 3 teenage boys found her body near a freeway construction site, 61 stab wounds from an ice pick. Stephanie called police that night, and then again 2 days later, and then again 5 days after that. Each call was tearful, high-pitched, fragmented. He said he was sorry. He said he would turn himself in. He didn't. He said he would try not to kill anyone else. He couldn't help it. He didn't know why he had stabbed her. He was so upset about it. The calls gave Stephanie a name, one the press and police would use for the next 2 years: the weepy-voiced killer. On July 21, 1982, Kathleen Greening, 33 years old, known to friends as Kathy, was preparing to leave for a vacation. Her best friend, Carol Kellogg, arrived that morning to pick her up for breakfast before they set off together. The front door was unlocked. Kellogg walked in. She found Kathy Greening dead in her bathtub, drowned. There was no phone call to police after Kathy's death, no weeping voice on the dispatch line, no ice pick, nothing that suggested the weepy-voiced killer. Investigators looked at her estranged husband. They looked at other suspects. The case went unsolved and stayed unsolved. What they did not know, what no one would know for 15 more years, was that Kathy Greening's address book contained a name written in her own handwriting, Paul S., with a phone number. Stephanie had likely known her. He had entered through her unlocked door, found her preparing to take a bath, and drowned her. Then he had walked out without making a single call. No confession, no tears, nothing. Just silence. That silence is what kept Kathy Greening's case cold for a decade. Barbara Simons was 40 years old and worked as a nurse. She was at the Hexagon bar that night and offered a cigarette to a stranger. The stranger offered her a ride home. She told a friend before she left, "I hope this guy's okay because I just need a ride home." The next morning, a newspaper carrier found her body along the banks of the Mississippi River. She had been stabbed more than 100 times. Stephanie called it in 2 days later. He took responsibility for her death and for Kimberly Compton's. Police had a voice. They had a pattern. They began to close in. By this point, investigators had identified Stephanie as a suspect and had placed him under surveillance. On August 21, they briefly lost track of him. In those few hours, he attacked a 21-year-old woman named Denise Williams, stabbing her with a screwdriver after offering her a ride. Williams fought back. She smashed a bottle against Stephanie's head and escaped. He was wounded. He called for medical help himself, and when the call came in, a dispatcher recognized his voice, the same voice from the tapes. Paul Michael Stephanie was arrested. He was tried for the murder of Barbara Simons and the attempted murder of Denise Williams. His own sister and ex-wife testified that the voice on the tapes was his, but voice comparison alone was not enough for a conviction on the other cases. He was sentenced to 58 years. The murders of Kimberly Compton and Kathleen Greening remained officially unsolved. Stephanie denied everything. He denied everything for 15 years. Paul Michael Stephanie, 53 years old, was diagnosed with terminal skin cancer. He had less than a year to live. He contacted investigators from his prison cell and told them he wanted to talk. What followed was a taped confession in which Stephanie laid out in full everything he had done. He confessed to the attack on Karen Patak. He confessed to the murder of Kimberly Compton. He confessed to the murder of Barbara Simons. And then he told them about Kathleen Greening, a woman whose death had never once been connected to him, in a case that had sat completely cold for 15 years with a different set of suspects entirely. Investigators confirmed it. He knew details about Greening's apartment, the layout, the bathroom, details that existed nowhere in any public record that only the person who had been inside that apartment could know. When asked why,
Why the calls? Why the confessions to police after each attack? Why he had spent 2 years begging to be caught while continuing to kill? Stefani said, "Since I've been locked down the last 15 years, I've wondered how all this could happen. And all I can say is I'm sick and I'm sorry, if sorry means anything after 15 years. He also asked investigators for the home addresses of his victims' families. He wanted to send them flowers and an apology. The request was denied. Paul Michael Stefani died on June 12, 1998, at Oak Park Heights Prison. He was 53 years old. Kathleen Greening's family received their answer 16 years after she was found dead in her bathtub, not because detectives solved the case, but because the man who killed her decided at the end of his life that he no longer wanted it carried alone.
Sharon Diane Crawford. Staunton, Virginia, was a city of about 25,000 people. It had a reputation for being safe, quiet, orderly, the kind of place where the North End felt insulated from the rest of the world. High's Ice Cream on Terry Court was a local institution. Milkshakes, malts, a wooden floor worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, the kind of place a family drove to on a warm April evening. On the night of April 11, 1967, 2 young women were closing the store. Carolyn Heavener Perry was 20 years old. Her sister-in-law, Constance Smoots Heavener, known to everyone as Connie, was 19. Neither of them had been scheduled to work that night. They were filling in for a coworker who had called in sick. That coworker was an 18-year-old named Sharon Diane Crawford. She had not called in sick because she was ill. She had called in sick because she was coming back. 10 days before the murders, Crawford had gone for a hamburger with a coworker from her other job, a woman named Joyce Bradshaw. As they were leaving the diner, Bradshaw told her to open the glove compartment of her car. Inside was a .25 caliber pistol she had purchased a few weeks earlier. Crawford told her there were 2 bullets in it. One was for her stepfather, who had sexually abused her. The other was for the Heavener girl. Bradshaw said nothing to anyone, not that night. Crawford entered the store through the back door. She told Connie Heavener she couldn't come in for her Wednesday shift. What happened in the minutes that followed was not witnessed by anyone who survived it. According to Crawford's own account, given more than 40 years later, there was a physical altercation. She had been taunted and teased about her sexuality. She was a lesbian, a fact her coworkers had somehow perceived. And in 1967, in a small Virginia city, that knowledge in the wrong hands was devastating. She said she had been pushed too far. She shot Carolyn Perry in the head. She shot Connie Heavener in the head. She took $138 from the bank deposit the women had prepared to close out the register. Then she walked out the back door and drove away. Connie Heavener's brother, the husband of one victim, the brother of the other, would arrive at the store not long after and find them both dead on the floor. What Sharon Crawford did next is one of the most chilling details of this case. She drove directly to the farm of Detective David Bocock, the Staunton police investigator who had taught her to shoot, who knew her, who was about to be assigned as the lead detective on the High's Ice Cream murders. She told him what she had done. She gave him the gun. Bocock buried it in a metal box on his property. The following morning, Bocock was at the crime scene. He filed an incident report. He took charge of the investigation. And when Joyce Bradshaw came to him the next day, the day after the murders, and told him what Crawford had said about the gun and the Heavener girl, Bocock came back to her 2 days later with a message. The bullets didn't match Crawford's gun. Crawford had taken a polygraph and passed it. She was cleared. He told Bradshaw that Crawford was a good shot. Bradshaw understood the implication. She said nothing to anyone for 41 years. Police arrested a man named William Thomas, a 24-year-old with no solid connection to the crime, no physical evidence placing him at the scene, and no murder weapon. He was tried in 1968 in what locals described as a media circus. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Not guilty.
But the second indictment for Carolyn Perry's murder remained on Thomas's record. It would hang over him for 4 more decades. He had done nothing. He knew it. The city of Staunton, by and large, did not. Meanwhile, Sharon Crawford continued working part-time at High's Ice Cream for months after the murders. She attended Connie Heavener's funeral. At the graveside, she noticed the exit wound on Heavener's neck. The place where the bullet that killed her had been retrieved was still visible. She checked herself into a hospital the same day. Then she married, moved to North Carolina, had 2 daughters, and disappeared into a quiet life. The case went cold. In 2000, a local man named Lowell Sheets, an Augusta County native who had been a classmate of the victims, began his own investigation. He spent years interviewing witnesses, families, former employees of High's. He found something investigators had apparently never assembled: a complete list of the store's employees at the time of the murders. When he asked the Staunton Police Department what interviews had been done with that group, the answer was stark. There was no complete list. Almost none of the employees had been interviewed. In 2008, through a chain of chance encounters, Joyce Bradshaw found her way to Sheets. She told him about the hamburger, the glove compartment, the 2 bullets, the girl named Diane Crawford. Sheets brought the information to former Detective Roy Hartless, who had retired from the Staunton PD and was now working as a private investigator. Hartless brought it to police. Investigators tracked down Sharon Diane Crawford Smith, now 60 years old, living back in Staunton, suffering from kidney failure and heart disease, in need of round-the-clock medical care. On November 28, 2008, Sharon Diane Crawford Smith sat down with investigators and confessed. She confirmed the motive, the taunting, the teasing about her sexuality. She described the physical altercation with Connie Heavener. She described driving to Bocock's farm. She named him. She said he had helped her dispose of the gun. The investigator who interviewed her later described her demeanor. She expressed shame. She expressed concern for the families of the victims. She did not cry. She was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her court date was scheduled for December. Her health forced a postponement. On January 19, 2009, Sharon Diane Crawford Smith died of kidney failure. She was 60 years old. 4 days after her death, Staunton police held a press conference to make the confession public. On that same day, December 30, 2008, the indictment that had shadowed William Thomas for 40 years was formally dismissed. He said his loss was not comparable to what happened to those families. He did not say it bitterly. He said it as a statement of fact. Detective David Bocock had died in 2006. He never answered for what he had done. His widow was in a nursing home. A gun matching the description Smith gave investigators eventually surfaced. Bocock had given it to a fellow officer in 1981, telling him not to tell anyone. Ballistic tests were inconclusive. The burial site on his farm was never definitively located. Why Bocock did what he did, whether it was protection of a young woman he knew, something more, or something the record will never disclose, died with him. Connie Heavener's brother, who had found the 2 women dead on the floor of the ice cream shop that April night in 1967, spent decades looking for an answer. He disputed Smith's motive to the end. His sister, he said, never made fun of anyone. Whatever the full truth was, it closed with 2 people who are both now dead. What remained for the families of Carolyn Perry and Connie Heavener was a name. 41 years late, but a name.
Willie Edwards, Jr. Montgomery, Alabama, January 1957. The Montgomery bus boycott had ended 2 months earlier with the desegregation of the city's transit system. It had been a year of extraordinary tension. The KKK had bombed the home of Martin Luther King Jr.,
bombed the home of Ralph Abernathy, bombed churches, bombed the homes of black bus riders. The Klan in Montgomery was not dormant. It was active, organized, and operating with near total impunity in a city where law enforcement and Klan membership frequently overlapped. Into this city, on the night of January 22, 1957, a 24-year-old black man named Willie Edwards, Jr. drove his Winnie-Dixie delivery truck. Willie Edwards was not an activist. He was not involved in the civil rights movement. He was a husband, a father of 2 young children with a third on the way. He had been called in to cover a sick colleague's shift. He told his wife Sarah he had to go because they needed the money. He said he'd be home later. He never came home. A group of Klansmen had been meeting that evening at the home of a man named Henry Alexander. A rumor had been circulating, the kind of rumor that in Montgomery in 1957 required no evidence and carried a death sentence, that a black Winnie-Dixie truck driver had said something inappropriate to a white woman. The rumor may have been about a different driver entirely. It did not matter. The men who gathered at Alexander's house that night were not interested in verification. They were armed with pistols and a rifle. They drove out looking for a Winnie-Dixie truck. They found Willie Edwards. They pulled him from the cab of his truck. They beat him. They drove him around Montgomery for hours, forcing him to denounce himself, to admit to something he had never done. He sobbed. He begged. He told them he had never said anything to any white woman. According to one account, one of the men pointed a gun at him and threatened to castrate him. He kept denying. They kept driving. Sometime in the early hours of January 23rd, the car stopped on the Tyler Goodwin Bridge, a bridge spanning the Alabama River approximately 40 feet above the water. The 4 men ordered Edwards out of the car. They pointed a gun at him and gave him a choice: jump or be shot. Willie Edwards climbed the railing of the bridge. He had swum in the Alabama River all his life. Perhaps he thought he could make it. He jumped. The 4 men watched him fall. Then they drove back into Montgomery and, according to one account, joked that he had gone for a swim. Sarah Edwards woke to an empty house. Willie's father, Willie Edwards Sr., began searching and found the truck in a grocery store parking lot. The driver's door was ajar. The lights were still on. Willie's wallet and food were on the passenger seat. He went to the Montgomery police and begged them to investigate. They filed a missing persons report 16 days later. On April 23, 1957, 3 months after Willie Edwards disappeared, 2 fishermen found a decomposed body in the Alabama River, 10 miles west of Montgomery. The medical examiner could not determine the cause of death. The official cause was listed as unknown. The manner of death was not classified as homicide. The police closed the missing persons case. Sarah Edwards was 23 years old. She was left alone with 3 small children, no compensation from her husband's employer, no investigation, no answers. She left Montgomery in 1961 and never returned. For nearly 2 decades, the case did not officially exist. In December 1975, investigators questioning a man about an unrelated crime asked him almost as an aside whether he knew anything about a Winn-Dixie truck driver who had disappeared in 1957. The man admitted he had been present on the Tyler Goodwin Bridge the night Willie Edwards was forced to jump. The case cracked open. One of the 4 men, Raymond Britt, agreed to give a signed affidavit in exchange for immunity. He described in precise detail how the group had abducted Edwards, beaten him, driven him to the bridge, and watched him fall. 3 men were indicted for first-degree murder: Henry Alexander, Jimmy York, and Sonny Kyle Livingston, Jr. The judge dismissed the charges. His reasoning, forcing a person to jump from a bridge, he concluded, does not naturally and probably lead to that person's death. Without a formally established cause of death, There could be no murder charge. The indictments were thrown out twice. Then the FBI intervened. Henry Alexander, it emerged, had been the Bureau's primary Klan informant in the Montgomery area. The FBI asked the Attorney General to give Alexander consideration. Alexander had previously been indicted for 4 church bombings, 2 home bombings, and the assault of a black woman on a bus. He had never been prosecuted for any of them. He was not prosecuted now. The charges were dropped. Jimmy York died in 1979. The case went cold for a second time. Henry Alexander had maintained his innocence to his wife Diane for 36 years. He had sat through the 1976 investigation, the indictments, the dismissals. He had watched it all collapse and said nothing. He had lived an ordinary life in the same city where Willie Edwards had lived and died, and he had said nothing. In the weeks before his death from cancer in December 1993, something changed. He told Diane everything. He said he was the one who drove the group to find Edwards that night. He said Edwards had never done anything wrong. He said that man never hurt anybody. I was just running my mouth. I caused it. He said he didn't know what God had planned for him. His family refused to believe the confession. They wanted nothing to do with what Diane knew. Diane Alexander could not let it go. Sarah Edwards, now Sarah Jean Salter, had rebuilt her life in Buffalo after leaving Montgomery 30 years earlier. She had put the death of her first husband as far behind her as she could manage. On August 9, 1993, her phone rang. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Diane Alexander. She said, "My husband killed your husband in 1957, and I've been looking for you for such a long time. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry for what happened to Willie Edwards." Sarah Salter later said that what mattered most to her was not justice, not prosecution, not any legal outcome. What mattered was the truth about the rumor, the false accusation that had been used to justify her husband's murder. She said, "I think now, since I have learned the truth and knowing he did not say things and whistle at a white woman, that is the most important thing to me. That makes me feel so good." Diane Alexander's actions following her husband's confession set the remaining legal process in motion. In 1997, at the insistence of Edwards' daughter Melinda, the Alabama Department of Vital Statistics changed the official cause of Willie Edwards Jr.'s death from unknown to homicide, 40 years after he had been forced off a bridge at gunpoint. A 1999 grand jury acknowledged he had been murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan, but declined to indict the surviving suspects, citing insufficient evidence. The FBI reopened the investigation in 2010. Sonny Kyle Livingston, the last surviving suspect, was interviewed. He said he did not remember confessing. The Department of Justice closed the case in 2013. The Tyler Goodwin Bridge, where Willie Edwards jumped into the Alabama River, had been demolished in 1980. Henry Alexander was buried. Jimmy York was buried. Raymond Britt was buried. Livingston died in 2016. No one was ever convicted of the murder of Willie Edwards Jr. Margaret Gibson. Hollywood, 1922. The film industry had existed for barely 2 decades, and already it had become something the world had never seen before, a machine for manufacturing gods. The faces projected on those screens were not merely famous, they were larger than life, literally, beautiful beyond proportion, eternal in their black and white perfection. The people who made those faces, who directed those films, who ran those studios, they operated in a world with its own rules, its own justice, and its own talent for burying what it needed buried. On the evening of February 1st, 1922, William Desmond Taylor, 49 years old, one of Hollywood's most respected directors, president of the Motion Picture Directors Association, spent the night at his bungalow at the Alvarado Court Apartments in the Westlake neighborhood of Los Angeles. His guest was Mabel Normand, the acclaimed comedian and his close companion. They drank gin cocktails. They discussed Nietzsche and Freud. At around 7:45 in the evening, Taylor walked Normand to her car. They blew kisses at one another as her chauffeur drove away. Taylor went back inside. Around 8 p.m., neighbors heard what sounded like a car backfiring. No one investigated. The next morning, Taylor's valet, Henry Peavy, arrived for work, opened the front door, and found his employer lying on his living room floor in a pool of blood, a bullet lodged between his neck and shoulder. Peavy's screams shattered the quiet of the courtyard. Within minutes, the bungalow was full of people, actors, actresses, studio executives. Before the police had been called, before the press had arrived, a Paramount Pictures studio fixer named Charles Eighton was already inside, removing documents and anything else that might embarrass the studio. The crime scene was compromised before it was ever formally identified as one. What followed was one of the most sensational and chaotic murder investigations in American history. The press descended. Every day brought a new revelation. Taylor's real name was not William Desmond Taylor. He had been born William Cunningham Dean Tanner in Ireland, had abandoned a wife and daughter in New York in 1908 without a word, and had remade himself from scratch in California. His former valet, a man named Edward Sands, had been stealing from him and forging his checks before vanishing. His neighbor had seen a figure, possibly a woman dressed in men's clothing, walking calmly away from Taylor's bungalow shortly after the sound of the shot. The suspect list grew absurd in its length. Mabel Normand, who had been the last person to see Taylor alive, was investigated. Mary Miles Minter, a 19-year-old actress whose love letters to Taylor were found in his apartment, written partly in code, was investigated. Minter's mother, Charlotte Shelby, a formidable woman who had once shown up at Taylor's door at night with a .38 revolver tucked in her sleeve, was considered a primary suspect for years. One theory held that Taylor had been cooperating with federal prosecutors to expose the drug dealers supplying Normand, and that the drug trade had him killed to prevent it. Another pointed to blackmail. The physical evidence deteriorated rapidly. The studio had removed materials from the scene. By 1940, all police files and physical evidence had disappeared entirely. The case was never officially solved. Prosecutors over the years declined to charge anyone. The murder of William Desmond Taylor became old Hollywood's most enduring open wound, a mystery that writers, filmmakers, and amateur investigators returned to for decades, with no resolution and no end. Margaret Gibson had been a genuine star of the silent film era, exquisitely beautiful, by her own account, the daughter of performers. She had been on stage since the age of 12. By 1910, she was in Denver, working in theater. In that same city, that same year, a stage actor named William Desmond Taylor was performing nearby. They knew each other. By 1914, they had appeared together in at least 4 films for Vitagraph Studios, including one titled, with a kind of retrospective irony, The Kiss. By 1917, Gibson's life had begun to unravel. She was arrested on charges connected to opium dealing and prostitution. The arrest record described it as vagrancy, the standard euphemism of the era, and was acquitted, but the publicity forced her to change her name. She became Patricia Palmer. In 1923, she was arrested again on federal extortion charges connected to a blackmail ring. The charges were dropped. She continued to work in films under various aliases for the next several years, then married, moved abroad, and fell out of the public record entirely. By 1964, she was living in the Hollywood Hills, quietly, under the name Pat Lewis. She was 70 years old. She had converted to Roman Catholicism. She was, by all accounts, a widow living in obscurity, a friend of neighbors, a woman with a past that no one around her knew.
On the evening of October 20th, 1964, Gibson was watching a local television program, Ralph Story's Los Angeles, when a short segment aired about the unsolved murder of William Desmond Taylor, 42 years cold. The host noted that the case was something authorities had better solve in the next 90 days. Gibson became hysterical. She blurted out to the neighbor she was watching with that she had killed him and that she had thought it was long forgotten. Her neighbor said nothing to anyone. She filed it away. The following day, Margaret Gibson suffered a heart attack on the floor of her kitchen. Sensing she was dying, she asked desperately for a priest. No priest was available. She could not wait. She began her confession anyway to the neighbor present, a young man named Ray Long, who knew her only as Pat Lewis, a widow and friend of his mother's. She told him she had once been a silent film actress. She told him she had shot and killed a man named William Desmond Taylor. She said she had nearly been caught. She said she had fled. She asked for absolution she could not receive from the only source she believed could give it. Ray Long did not know who William Desmond Taylor was. He was distracted by the crisis unfolding in front of him. He could not remember later every word she said. Her confession was directed at his mother, not at him, and in the chaos of a woman dying on a kitchen floor, details were lost. What he remembered clearly, writing about it 35 years later, was the image of her, the absolute conviction in her voice, the terror, the urgency. He wrote, looking back across 35 years, he believed everything that woman said in her final moments was the absolute truth. Margaret Gibson died on October 21, 1964. Her death certificate listed her name as Ella Margaret Arce, also known as Ella Margaret Lewis, also known as Patricia Palmer. Her last listed occupation was actress. Her industry was motion pictures. No independent evidence has ever confirmed Gibson's confession. The police files are gone. The physical evidence is gone. The other suspects are gone. The motive, if it was blackmail, if it was something that happened in 1914 when she and Taylor worked together, if it was something else entirely, died with her on that kitchen floor. Several people confessed to the Taylor murder over the years. Gibson is the only one whose confession came unsolicited, in private, in extremis, to someone who had no idea what she was talking about, with no conceivable motive to lie. She had worked with Taylor. She had been arrested for crimes that fit the profile of the blackmail theory investigators had long favored. In the year following Taylor's murder, she received acting work at Famous Players Lasky, the studio where Taylor had been employed. Her name never appeared in the original investigation. Her connection to Taylor had been entirely invisible to police for 40 decades. The murder of William Desmond Taylor remains officially unsolved. It has been officially unsolved for over a century. The case files are gone, the witnesses are gone, and the woman who died on a kitchen floor in the Hollywood Hills in 1964 asking for a priest who never came took whatever certainty existed with her. What is left is a name, a confession made to a stranger who didn't recognize it, and a television program still playing somewhere, asking the police if they might solve a murder in the next 90 days.